Like and subscribe to Sinister Shadows Studio, The Haunting of Raven's Bridge. I've always been a sucker for urban legends. Every town I visit, I make it a point to ask locals about their famous ghost stories or legends. But nothing prepared me for what happened in a small town in New England where I was working as a freelance journalist. I arrived in town one sunny morning in October. The colors of the fall made the entire place look picturesque. I decided to stop by a local cafe to get a taste of the town's culture and, of course, hear any good ghost stories. It didn't take long for a friendly old man named Robert to start chatting with me. When I told him about my interest in urban legends, his face paled. He whispered, "Do you know about Raven's Bridge?" I hadn't. Raven's Bridge, as Robert told me, was the oldest bridge in town and had a terrifying legend attached to it. As the story went, a woman named Eliza had been wrongly accused of witchcraft in the 1700s. She was hanged on Raven's Bridge. Before her death, she'd cursed the town, promising to return and take revenge on descendants of her accusers. Ever since, on foggy nights, a figure draped in black was said to appear near the bridge, causing accidents and occasional disappearances. Being the urban legend enthusiast I was, I decided to pay a visit to the bridge that very night. To make things more interesting, the weather forecast predicted a thick fog. The evening settled in, and the fog enveloped the town like a ghostly shroud. Equipped with a flashlight and my camera, I made my way to the bridge. The path was dense with overgrown trees, making it seem like they were trying to shield me from what lay ahead. As I approached the bridge, I could see its aged, moss-covered stones. It was eerily silent. Midway across the bridge, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My flashlight began to flicker. Panicking, I smacked it against my hand, hoping to bring it back to life. Just as it came back on, I heard a soft whisper in my ear. "Why have you come?" I turned around, but nobody was there. Shivers ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a result of the creepy setting and Robert's story. Suddenly I heard the soft wail of a woman crying. It echoed through the fog, sending chills down my back. The fog grew thicker, almost suffocating me. Through the dense mist, I spotted a shadowy figure. A woman draped in black, her face covered by a hood. Her feet barely touched the ground, making her seem as if she was floating. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure started moving towards me, her wails growing louder. I wanted to run but felt glued to the spot. As she came closer, I could make out her pale, sorrow-filled eyes staring straight into mine. She extended a bony, cold hand towards me, and in a trembling voice whispered, "Are you one of them?" Gathering all my courage, I shook my head, trying to convey that I was not a descendant of her accusers. I stammered, I just wanted to know your story." For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Then, slowly, the figure started to fade away, her wails turning into soft, distant whispers. Before she vanished completely, she said, "Remember me, and tell them the truth." I stood there, gasping for breath, my entire body shaking. The fog began to lift, and the moonlight pierced through, lighting up the bridge. Returning to the cafe the next morning, I found Robert. I recounted my encounter, and he listened, wide-eyed. As I finished, he whispered, "You're lucky. Some aren't given a chance." My experience at Raven's Bridge changed me. It wasn't just another urban legend for me. It was a terrifying reality, a testament to the fact that sometimes the line between myths and reality can blur, and local legends might be truer than we think. The Shadows of Larchwood. Urban legends and folklore have always fascinated me. My interest in them once led me to the sleepy town of Larchwood. The legend there was not of ghosts or witches, but of a far more elusive entity, shadows. A quaint town, Larchwood's history was tainted with tales of people who had encountered these shadowy figures at night. The legends said these weren't ordinary shadows, but figures that moved on their own, independent of any light source. Anyone who came in contact with these shadows was never seen again. The locals called them the Takers. Being a journalist, I saw this as a great story. I decided to visit Larchwood, thinking that these tales were merely exaggerations. I was wrong. I checked into the only motel in town and was greeted by Anna, the elderly owner. When I mentioned why I was in town, she frowned. "It's best not to go looking for trouble," she warned. That evening, as dusk set in, I set out with my camera and voice recorder, hoping to capture some evidence of these alleged shadow figures. The town was silent, save for the distant chirping of crickets. Not wanting to venture too far, I began by exploring the park at the heart of Larchwood. As I walked, the lampposts around began to flicker. An eerie silence enveloped the surroundings. The usual nighttime sounds seemed to have been muted. I felt an uncanny sensation of being watched. Suddenly, I saw it. A shadow, devoid of any apparent light source, moving stealthily between trees. It wasn't human-shaped. Rather, it was a formless dark mass, slithering and expanding. My heart raced as I tried to capture it on my camera, but it didn't show in the footage. Then another shadow appeared. Then another. They started surrounding me, and a cold dread filled my heart. Remembering Anna's warning, I decided to make a run for it. As I sprinted back towards the motel, the shadows seemed to chase me, growing larger and more menacing. Every so often, I would feel a coldness brush past me, a fleeting touch of the unknown. I could hear faint whispers in a language I couldn't recognize. Bursting into the motel, I slammed the door behind me, panting heavily. Anna, hearing the commotion, came out of her room. Her eyes widened when she saw the terror on my face. "You saw them, didn't you?" she murmured. I nodded, struggling to find words. She beckoned me to sit down and handed me a warm cup of tea. "Many years ago," she began, "Larchwood was a thriving town, but its residents, in their arrogance, began to dabble in dark arts, hoping to harness the power of shadows. They succeeded, but not in the way they had intended. The shadows came to life, consuming everything in their path." I shivered, realizing how close I'd come to becoming another victim. For the next few nights, Anna allowed me to stay in her room, which was filled with talismans and candles. It seemed to be the only safe place in Larchwood. During my stay, Anna told me more tales of the people who'd vanished after encountering these shadows. Some were outsiders like me, but most were locals who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. When I finally left Larchwood, I was a changed person. The footage and recordings from that night were blank, as if the shadows had erased themselves. My editor scoffed at my account, attributing it to an overactive imagination. But I know what I experienced. Now when the night comes and shadows begin to play on my walls, I can't help but wonder if, somewhere in those dark corners, the takers of Larchwood are waiting for me. The Silent Hitchhiker of Cold Hollow. Every small town has its secrets and its legends. I grew up in a quaint town near the Cold Hollow Mountains. Throughout my childhood, I'd heard whispered tales of the Silent Hitchhiker. I never paid it any mind until that fateful winter night. The legend said that on cold, moonless nights, a mysterious woman could be seen hitchhiking along the desolate stretch of road that passed through the heart of the forest. Those who stopped for her would notice that she wouldn't say a word, only pointing to a turnoff deeper into the woods. The few who claimed to have seen her and didn't turn where she pointed would later find mysterious scratches on their cars, as if something tried to get in. Those who did follow her directions were never seen again. On a bleak winter evening, while returning from a late event in the neighboring town, I found myself driving along that very stretch. The tales of the Silent Hitchhiker came to mind, but I brushed them off as childish legends. But then, as the woods grew denser and the road became more desolate, I saw her. A lone figure, illuminated by my headlights. A woman, dressed in white, her face obscured by long dark hair. She had her thumb outstretched. A chill ran down my spine. Despite every nerve in my body screaming at me to drive past, some morbid curiosity made me stop. She approached the passenger side and opened the door, taking a seat without a word. Trying to shake off my rising fear, I asked, "Where are you headed?" She just pointed deeper into the forest. Every instinct told me to ask her to leave, but a strange compulsion made me turn the car in the direction she indicated. The road seemed to go on forever, the dense tree canopy blotting out the stars. It felt like I had entered another realm. Occasionally, I would glance over at the woman, but she remained motionless, her face always hidden. Suddenly, she raised her hand, signaling me to stop. We were in a clearing with an old dilapidated house barely visible through the overgrowth. She stepped out of the car, silently beckoning me to follow. My logical mind had long been overridden by an eerie trance. I followed her into the house. Inside, I found pictures scattered everywhere. As I picked one up, cold realization hit me. They were photos of various people in their cars, all on that same stretch of road. Some looked terrified, while others appeared as entranced as I felt. I felt her cold touch on my shoulder, and for the first time, I saw her face. It was twisted in eternal anguish, her eyes hollow with pain. She whispered in a voice like the rustling of dead leaves, "They didn't help me. Will you?" Suddenly, memories not my own flooded my mind, of her being stranded on that road, of the terrifying chase through the woods, and her tragic end in this very house. The sheer weight of her pain made me collapse. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my car, parked on the side of the main road. The sun was rising, casting a soft glow through the trees. Had it all been a dream? That's what I believed until I reached home and found a faded photograph on the passenger seat. A picture of me, driving, with the silent hitchhiker beside me. Years have passed since that night. I left my hometown, but the memory has never faded. The photo serves as a haunting reminder. I later learned that in the 1970s, a young woman had gone missing in the Cold Hollow region. Her car broke down, and she was never found. Some say she's still trying to find her way home, while others believe she's seeking vengeance. All I know is that the Silent Hitchhiker is more than just an urban legend. Whispering Pines. As a journalist, I've traveled to many places and heard countless stories. The most chilling account I ever came across was in the town of Altonville, where the Whispering Pines forest holds a dark urban legend that few dare to speak of. Altonville was nestled deep in the heart of a valley, surrounded by towering pine trees. The locals had always been tight-lipped about the forest, especially after sundown. I arrived, initially intrigued by another story, but local whispers drew me toward the enigma of Whispering Pines. At a local diner, I met Martha, a lady in her 70s with deep-set eyes that carried decades of memories. Over a cup of tea, she finally shared the tale that had haunted the town for generations. Decades ago, Altonville was home to a close-knit community that celebrated an annual festival at the forest's edge. However, in 1943, during one such festivity, a group of children ventured deeper into the forest to play hide-and-seek. Hours passed, night fell, and the children didn't return. Search parties were dispatched, but the dense pines seemed to swallow up all sound and paths, confusing the searchers. As the night wore on, the parents claimed to hear faint whispers carried by the wind, whispers of their children calling out to them. But the voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, leading them in circles. By dawn, all efforts to find the children were in vain. The town mourned, and the festivities were never held again. But the story took an even darker turn. Every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, locals claimed they could hear whispers in the wind, pleas of the children, asking for a way back home. Martha confessed she had lost her younger brother that night, and her eyes welled up as she recounted the countless nights she'd been drawn to the forest's edge following his faint voice, only to be met with a suffocating silence. Curiosity and sympathy propelled me to stay in Altonville for the impending anniversary. With a recorder and flashlight, I decided to camp near the forest on the fated night. As night descended and the wind rustled through the pines, I began to hear them, faint, childlike whispers, fragmented sentences, and soft pleas. Chills ran down my spine. I pressed the record button and followed the voices deeper into the woods. The whispers seemed to be guiding me to a specific location. There, I stumbled upon a clearing with a dilapidated cabin, its wooden structure half devoured by the forest. The whispers grew louder, almost beckoning me inside. With every ounce of courage, I entered. The cabin was filled with relics from the past, old toys, a spinning top, and a tattered doll. On the walls, crude drawings depicted the forest, the festival, and the children. In the center stood an old, rusted music box. Compelled by an unknown force, I wound it up. As it played a haunting lullaby, the whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices, each overlapping the other. It felt as if the very walls of the cabin were closing in on me. Suddenly, the ground beneath gave way, and I found myself plunging into darkness. Hours or perhaps minutes passed before I awoke, disoriented, in the heart of the forest. The first light of dawn pierced through the trees. The recorder lay beside me, still running. Rushing back to Altonville, I played the recording for Martha. We heard the whispers, the eerie lullaby, but then another voice emerged. It was Martha's brother, clear as day, saying, "Protect the forest, keep them out. We're trapped between times." Realization dawned upon us. The children were lost, not just in space, but in time. The forest, the cabin, and the music box were all entwined in a temporal anomaly. The townsfolk, led by Martha, sealed off the forest, and I left Altonville with a heavy heart. The true horror was not just in the loss, but in the eternal restless wandering of those innocent souls. To this day, the tape remains as evidence of the twisted reality of Whispering Pines, a testament to the thin line between our world and the unknown. Like and subscribe to Sinister Shadows Studio.